You lucky folks, we're getting a fourth stream of the day. You should be all excited. And we have a special guest today, Magical Water.
Hi.
You want to introduce yourself, Magical Water?
Sure, I'm Magical Water. I'm Issa's best friend. And I don't know what else can I say about myself. I'm East African and also a Sufi.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we're going to start this up. Welcome, everybody. Here we go. I'm going into this blind. Magical Water knows a lot about this, but we're going to see what this is like. So we like to do special topics on this channel and explore different kinds of ideas. So this is Deen Noor Sati on Clay and Ancestral Knowledge, States of Creation, Episode 1. Here we go.
Can you hear it? Because I can't.
Yes.
Oh. I can't really hear it. That's okay.
So you can't hear any of it?
No, but I watched it, so I really want you to
All right, let's see.
share the talking points.
Maybe it's because you're on your phone.
Yeah, probably.
Mm.
It's okay.
The audience can hear it.
Yeah,
But
okay, good. As long as they can hear it, that's good. I've watched it.
what I'll do is I'll put captions on.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, so you can't hear it either. Huh.
Yeah. Who can't hear it?
The audience.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting.
Still can't hear it. I don't know if this video is gonna work, Issa.
What do you mean?
Still can't hear it.
Well, we have the subtitles.
Oh, okay.
I think that will work because maybe they block the sound. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
When you share it, I've never had that happen before. So let's see. Do you hear it now?
No. That's a really good name. Different dynamics of the Deen. Should we troubleshoot and then come back on and delete this one?
I don't think it matters. They
Okay.
can see the subtitles. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I will go through this and see if we can find anything. But it's an exploration.
Okay. Let me know what topic interests you in the subtitles, because I thought this video was interesting.
And I can hear it. So I'm gonna just close this window and try it with a different one. Let's just try it again and see if it's just that kind of issue. You know what I mean?
Can you see what I'm doing?
No.
Okay, I was Googling it. Okay. I'm gonna hang up. Let's hang up and then try another one.
Well, let's just see if this works if I do this.
Oh, okay.
And so we had this interesting mix where I would say it was a very
I can hear it.
I think she was the
Still don't hear
center.
it?
Yep, I can hear it.
You can hear it.
Yeah, but I think we should start over. It's like 7 minutes in. No way. Or
Oh, it's
what do you?
3 minutes in.
Okay. No, I'm
Do you
talking
want
about
to start from the
us.
beginning? I don't mind starting from the beginning if you want to do that. Does that help you?
No, it doesn't help me. We can continue.
Are you sure? Because I don't mind. Like, if people have
I think it helps you because I've watched it. Remember?
I mean, I hear the whole thing. I've been hearing it.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I don't think I've ever been this honest on a podcast. What I'll speak to is what I know. There was a softness, a very mystical softness that I was raised with. Both my parents were Muslim. My father, I often say, was my first spiritual teacher. There is a way to communicate with the other world. It's just a matter of learning the ways in which that can happen.
Hi, Dina.
Hi.
It's wonderful to have you on the first episode of States of Creation.
Mm-hmm.
Your practice is rooted in ancestry, in spirituality. But I would like to start this conversation before we dig into like your practice. I want to start this conversation by understanding your spiritual background.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This is such an honor to be on the first episode of this podcast. It's much needed. So my name is Deen Nursati. I'm originally from Sudan and Somalia, and then I was mostly raised between Paris, France, and Nairobi, Kenya. And so my spirituality was very interesting growing up, I think, because of all of these different influences. Both my parents were Muslim, but when you dig deeper into the history of that region, we were many things at many different times. And so on the Nubian side, we were Christian Nubians. So my father's family is from Dongola in north of Sudan, and that was one of the Nubian empires. That was a Christian empire up until it was converted to Islam very slowly. And then on my mother's side, Somalia was Muslim a lot longer, or Islam came before it came into Sudan, so they've been Muslim for much longer. But we also had Jewish Yemenite Jews that came in as well. So there's also stories of my mother's lineage a very long time ago being Yemenite Jewish. And so there is this amalgamation of all these different influences. And then what we're going to be talking about today is the influence way before that people think stopped, but it never really did. We just kind of folded our animist indigenous beliefs. And this is why Islam looks so different from country to country. I'll meet people from West Africa, or my friends from Levantine, or my friends who are, from Iran. And we just will look, and Islam is so different because it's really culturally different. And so the way that I grew up was very interesting, because even within Sudan, Islam is practiced very differently from region as well as within families. So a lot of the time people will argue about what Islam is in Sudan or what religion is in Sudan, because we all are bringing in our own personal narratives and our family narratives. So what I'll speak to is what I know, which is my family, which is very unique and different from most families.
Right.
So I would say that we practice Islam in a way that very much is rooted in our Nubian ancestry. And I think that's a varying degree for a lot of different Nubians, depending on how recently your family has moved from the ancestral lands. I would say then my grandmother on my father's side, she comes from what would be considered more of like a Sufi lineage. And so we had this interesting mix where I would say it was a very matriarchal family. I think she was the center of our family. And then I would say that the men also were raised to treat the women in a way that maybe is very different from the more patriarchal aspects of Sudanese culture. So the way that I experienced Islam was very gentle. I had parents growing up where my father, I often say, was my first spiritual teacher, because I would stay with him, long nights and ask questions and tell him how I questioned the existence of God. And
That's amazing.
What was so beautiful is that he was like, your path as a...
So what do you feel so far?
I want to hear your thoughts.
Oh my gosh, I asked you first.
Okay. What do I feel so far? I feel like this isn't like mainstream Islam, like the Islam that everyone is familiar with. I feel like this is a totally different side of Islam that folks aren't really used to hearing.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important for people to know that these other perspectives exist, because we keep
Exactly.
hearing, our friends who, have certain values about women and other kinds of perspectives that may be a little bit from ancient medieval times,
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's different kinds of outlooks, and I think that's important for us to see. And it's kind of cool. She's Sudanese and Somali, so she's a real dynamic East African package.
The Muslim is to find your path and to find yourself, and also to find God in your own way. And I always thought that was so wise, because if you go down a spiritual path, you will always find your way to God, your way to spirituality, even if it's different from what your parents have raised you with.
Right.
So I felt like for me growing up, it was much more about that discovery. And there was a softness, a very mystical softness that I was raised with, that definitely is part of the way that my family practices. And I would say that they would be considered maybe a little bit more liberal, especially because, education was such an important thing in our family. My grandmother's family, there's a story that my great-grandfather, so my grandmother's father, really believed in women's education at a time where in their village they didn't believe in it. And so he would take my grandmother and her sister on a horse every morning to school, and people would throw rocks at them because they didn't believe in women being educated in that way. So because we have that aspect in our family, I think we practice religion as well as the position of women in our family very differently from a lot of people. So I think that influences even the way that I see the world.
Right. And I think that what's so interesting, it seems that this way of thinking of spirituality and living it, it's very much anchored in your artistic practice, right? You often talk about working your arts outside of the studio, of cleansing your body. What are like the ritual that you have kept maybe from your childhood, and what are the rituals that you are doing now that help you every day, but also that help you with your artistic practice?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we have in our culture is this awareness of space and body. So we're constantly in this state, and this is something that I was raised with, where you're in this place of purification, because we believe that by purifying your body as well as your space, you're protecting yourself. And so there's this whole system of protection that we have. And if we go into kind of like the cosmology of Islam, for instance, that very is aligned with the cosmology even of some animist cultures, is that they believe that you have the seen world and the unseen world. And so the same world that we have here, superimposed on top of it, is a world and a dimension that we don't see. And that there are spirits and beings. People talk about, it's popular to talk about jinns, but what people don't understand is a jinn is anything that isn't human and that isn't an angel. So anything is a jinn. A gnome is a jinn, a fairy is a jinn. All of these things are all classifications of jinns. And so in that way of thinking, you can sometimes attribute things going wrong to maybe having an influence from something from the other world.
Right.
And so part of the daily practice is to always be in this place of adjusting your energetic resonance through the practice of usually plants and different allies. So we have a practice of like incense cleansing.
Right.
Most women in every house, in Sudan and Somalia and many parts of the global south where there's incense practices, and I'm sure in some parts of the global north as well, you walk around every.
Okay, what do you think about energetic resonance? And then also she talks about like, wait, go back a little bit. Can you go back like 30 seconds?
Sure. 30?
Yeah, like 30 seconds.
Attribute things going wrong to maybe having an influence from something from the other world.
Right.
And so part of the daily practice is to always be in this place of adjusting your energetic resonance through the practice of usually plants and different allies. So we have a practice of like incense cleansing.
Right.
Most women in every house, in Sudan and Somalia and many parts of the global south where there's incense practices, and I'm sure in some parts of the global north as well, you walk around every day and different incenses are used for different things. And then there's also that aspect of like cleansing your body. Ritual cleansing is very important. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Like we have that also in our culture. And so when I talk about it in terms of cleansing for my practice, is that I'm working to basically put myself into a state where I'm able to then have a very clear channel to create. And that's in the moment where I'm creating, but it's also in the day-to-day, because what I'm trying is to basically create.
So what are you feeling? What did you want to ask?
Yeah, so I want to talk about this idea of like energetic resonance and her talking just about plants and like different types of allies like incense and this idea of like purification of the body so that we are like a clear channel um for like a clear creative channel, right?
Sorry, could you say it one more time? There was a little bit of a glitch. Say it one more time.
Okay, I said I find it interesting, this idea of energetic resonance. And she talks about um you know purification and using plants and other allies such as incense to purify from bad spirits, but also to help her become a clear creative channel. What do you think about this?
Well, I do think it's a very interesting kind of outlook on, spirituality and Islamic thought, that you might kind of see how you can see Islamic thought within like the New Age spaces. I think that's kind of interesting. It sort of feels like it fits within that kind of framework.
Yeah, but do you think that it fits in with the New Age framework, or do you think that this was originally an Islamic framework that maybe was overlooked?
Well, I think that New Age frameworks incorporate other kind of traditions. I think it just fits into that more kind of spiritualist kind of thing. I mean, I think that all religions have their spiritual dynamic. So I
Mhm.
definitely think Islam has that too. But I feel that this kind of manifestation, I'm just saying, it kind of aligns with that sort of New Age kind of mystical framework, which it doesn't take away from it. It's an interesting framing, you know.
Yeah. Is there that practice in Judaism?
Of course, they call it Kabbalah. They have the
Oh,
Kabbalah mystical approach.
okay.
Every religion has their spiritual practice, you know.
And what about in Christianity?
Of course,
Oh,
you have spiritual elements. I mean, the big JC, as I've said before, you know, some people say Nabi Isa, Salah is Jesus Christ, JC.
it's that.
But he himself is his teachings fit a mystical modality. He fits that kind of spiritual master with disciple, which is a kind of a practice that you see within Sufi practice. So, yeah, I think that definitely fits.
Yeah.
In which I'm continuously moving through through space in a way where I'm not kind of held down by things that might not serve me. So the way that I see it when it comes to working as an artist is that you have this channel and that you might have blocks around the channel. And so that block can be karmic. That block can also be something that you've been taught through conditioning. That could be the shame, the guilt, the patriarchy, the need for validation, ego, whatever it is. And part of the practice is to excavate all of those things and to see which things are almost like latched on to your energetic body and to try to cleanse them. You know, some people, it's popular to talk about shadow work. You know, you're going into your own being and seeing the things that are not yours, that have built your identity that you think is you, but isn't really you. Right. And so that's why for me, the practice of making art is actually a complete lifestyle, because it's not about the times where you're making art. The times where you're making art is just the accumulation of the work that you've done.
So I definitely feel what she just said fits into kind of feminist, intersectional types of dynamics. And I don't think that it's wrong to have these things, but I do think the modern definitely connects with the ancient. Do you know what I mean?
What do you mean? Explain a little more. Could you say more? Say more.
So she was talking about patriarchal spaces, patriarchal narratives. She's using a modern feminist spiritualistic framework on kind of ancient spiritual frameworks. So it's a combination. This is why people use terms like the New Age, the past with the modern and the present, if you know what I mean. The
Yes,
future, the past and the present.
but is it a modern feminist? Because like
Yeah.
ancient societies were matriarchal. Like if you look at ancient Egypt, it was a matriarchal society. I know Judaism is sort of a matriarchal society. So could it be an ancient framework that maybe I don't know. I don't think that what she's saying is feminist. I think it comes from like an ancient matriarchal framework.
I don't, from what we know about ancient things, I don't think that these kinds of frameworks that she's using are ancient. Like the point that you said about female-led societies is accurate, but the way that the lens and the methodology of deconstruction is not ancient. It is modern. And it's okay. Like I think we have to let go of this construct of the modern being bad or being not relevant and connected to the past. I think you can have a fusion of the both. I think there's this fear that people have that they're like, well, if it's modern, then whatever happened in the past is lost and its essence is lost. And I don't think that's a healthy way of looking at these things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you. But what part of it is modern, would you say?
She's using feminist frameworks.
Like what? Like I didn't catch it.
Okay, I'll rewind it and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I think you might not realize it because you kind of live within the framework using feminist frameworks that you don't even realize that they're actually feminist. But I'll show you what I'm talking about. Look at this.
Okay.
Look at that.
You've been taught through conditioning. That could be the shame, the guilt, the patriarchy.
There we go. That's not an ancient concept at all. That is a modern
Oh,
framework. Guilt and shame. These are connected to like things that you would see with Brene Brown. This is not stuff that you see from the ancient times, and
but
that's
my
not
thing
bad.
is, how is so yeah, guilt, shame, and then patriarchy.
Yeah, these are definitely modern constructs
I
that are
agree. I agree.
utilized.
Those are, yeah, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it. That's what I'm trying to say. We don't need to feel shame that people are using modern frameworks to
What is
engage with their spiritual
no? That's
tradition now. Yeah, people,
yeah.
it was patriarchal. Like, let's be honest, most of these ancient societies were pretty patriarchal. Some of them did have matriarchies, but even if they were matriarchal, they're not like feminist matriarchies that we see. It doesn't use the same feminist framework that we see now. You
What
know,
is what is your relationship to patriarchy? Like, what do you like? How do you see it, like as a man? Because like, I don't
Mm.
know. I don't hate it or love it. I don't like. I guess I don't understand it fully. Um. So yeah, question to you.
So I take a very neutral position on these things. I think we have differing types of governing structures. So some governing structures have men who are in power, and some governing structures have women in power. The problem that comes about is when we attach it to systemic and systematic inequality. This is the problem.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
That's the issue.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
So if there's inequity and inequality, then that's something that we need to discuss.
The need for validation, ego, whatever it is. And part of the practice is to excavate all of those things and to see which things are almost like latched on to your energetic body and to try to cleanse them. You know, some people, it's popular to talk about shadow work. You know, you're going into your own being and seeing the things that are not yours that have built your identity that you think is you, but isn't really you.
Right.
And so that's why for me, the practice of making art is actually a complete lifestyle.
This is not frameworks you would have seen in like ancient literature. I'm just letting you know.
I have
This
a
is all
question for
modern.
you.
Go ahead.
I know as an actor and someone who is a creative in ways do are there any practices here that you use or like that you find interesting?
Well, I'm into like mindfulness. I think that's interesting. She was talking about shadow work. I think that that's kind of an interesting kind of work to do. And kind of engaging with your own self, dealing with your guilt, dealing with your shame. I think being able to hold balance and control within is really important. So I definitely think
Uh,
those are interesting things to consider. Yes.
what within the Islamic framework, what are ways that I guess like because hers is a little bit more like you said modern, um, but for folks, I'm just asking like, does Islam offer frameworks to deal with these things like the shadow work and all of that?
I think it depends on your perspective of Islam. My position is that Islam is polythic, not monolithic, meaning there's many different expressions that exist within Islam. So it depends on what expression you're looking at. If you're taking a more kind of spiritual, mystical, let's say Sufi approach, you do have these types of things. If you're taking more of like a literalist, you know, modern authority approach, it might be a little bit more difficult. You know,
Yeah.
it has a more limited toolkit that you can work with, because really what you have is just whatever texts say, that's what it is. This is kind of a little bit more creative. It has a more flavor of spiritual creativity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, we'll continue.
Because it's not about the times where you're making art. The times where you're making art is just the accumulation of the work that you've done up until that. The work is to actually be within yourself. And that's the practice of self-awareness, you know, is how do you then increase your intuition, increase your sensitivity, which is what artists also have a superpower with,
Right.
to then feel within your body what it is that is not yours, and then go through that practice of excavating it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because it seems to be very much linked to the material that you're using, because you're using clay.
Yeah.
There's this idea of excavating.
Yes.
There's this idea that like the clay carries all the lands. It carries everything that has happened to the lands.
Yeah.
It also carries our ancestors in some ways, because often our ancestors been putting into that
Yes.
lens, right?
Yes.
So you talk specifically about clay as being a teacher and an initiator.
Mhm.
What does clay has taught you?
Yeah.
That was cute. What has clay has taught you? I think clay is a very interesting material to work with because it's very malleable and you can kind of manipulate it into whatever kind of form you want to. And then when I was younger, I went to a friend's school and we used to put clay figures into kilns and then they would become hardened and solidified within that form. So you can kind of use the clay, and I think it can be a metaphor to our own kind of realities of like maybe who we want to form, who we want to be.
Mm.
Form
Yeah.
ourselves into a certain place and then put that being into the kiln and then glaze it. Glazing
Mhm.
is really, or you glaze it actually before you put it in the kiln, or you make it shine and glimmer. It's very cool. It's very cool stuff. All right, we'll continue.
I think that in the practice or any mystical practice, anything can become a teacher because it's your psyche creating the space in which you have a container to learn. I think what's really special about clay, it is one of the oldest mediums in the world.
Right.
And it is something that has been used across different traditions. And it is something that's utilizing earth. And there's something in the alchemy of clay. There's a resonance because it carries the land and it carries history and it carries time. That for me, it feels like it almost has a mind of its own. I think with anybody who's worked with clay and tried to mold it, you want it to go a certain way, and any material really, and it doesn't go that way. So for me, I see that almost like it's a person, it's a being, and it wants to become something. And often when I work with clay, I don't sketch, I don't make a plan. My practice actually is to completely let go of the idea of what I want to make and to sit with the clay and then just allow it to tell me where it wants to go. And so that's how I discover my forms. And the reason why I say it's also an initiator is I've had times when I've stepped away from it and then I've come back to it and I've been technically even better. It's because it almost told me, like, take a moment. You need to work on yourself before you can come back to me. And so it has, to me, for me personally, it's a being that almost communicates to you and is teaching you along the way about yourself.
So do you feel that the actual clay and the act of working the clay is a way for you to communicate with your ancestors, or with it's like a portal?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the three things are happening. There's the material that is embodied, that becomes
we
a
pause
physical
it?
thing that is
Sure,
one.
of course. What do you
Okay,
feel?
can we stop? I was thinking we could pause here and then we could do a second one if we want. What do you think?
You want to just go through the whole episode?
We can go through the whole episode. Okay.
I think we should just do that. Let's just knock it off. There's multiple episodes here and just see what we're feeling and vibing with this. So,
Okay.
That's like, I like to do that. I like to try to get through the whole thing because it allows for more space. But do you have any feelings that you want to share so far about the molding of the clay and the three type of modalities that she has? Do you have any feelings about that?
No, we can keep going.
Okay.
An actor, there's me as the vessel, and then there's these ancestors that are supporting that whole communication.
Actor.
And
her,
so I feel like
the ancestor.
it's a container through which I can experience my ancestral transmissions. And because of also the way that I use clay, I don't use a wheel. I use a coiling, which is a very old method of rolling coils and then adding to them. And you spin a small little hand wheel. And there's something about the circular motion when I'm working that brings you almost into this like rhythmic trance. Like I can hear the movements. There's this synesthesia that happens.
Yeah.
And then in that state, you can receive information of like where it wants to go, or you can like hear ideas that kind of just get dropped, get that downloaded into your psyche. And then the other thing that I also receive is that I'll see flashes of where the piece wants to go. So I'll see a form and I'll be like, this is what I want to become. And in that moment, I do feel like the ancestral aspect comes out through that, but it also particularly comes out in the moments in between when I'm working. I think that, the idea of ancestors, I think, is so foreign when you've grown up in a Western framework.
I would say even within a standard Islamic framework, that's not ancestral elements is not really something that you pick up on. This is very African ancestral, and I would say across Africa, and I would say it would probably include Muslim Africans too. You coming from that background, coming from an African background, do you think that that's true? Do you think you have more of a focus on ancestors than, let's say, someone from like, I don't know, like Bahrain or Qatar? What do you think?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, I think so. I think we do place a huge emphasis on ancestors. Um, and just like being in connection and in communication with ancestors. Um, I don't know about Qatar and these places and like, just Arab culture and if that exists within their frameworks, but definitely in East Africa, yeah, we have a very strong connection to um, our ancestors for sure.
I would say West Africa too. I think across Africa, it's a big thing.
What about like in your traditions, whether that be Jewish or Pakistani, do any of them or Desi or Jewish traditions, do any of them hold emphasis like on ancestors?
Well, the prayers, like Jewish prayers, are really, really big into ancestral elements. Like, it's a big deal. The ancestors are a big deal for, you know, Jacob, Isaac, um, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. Like, that's like super important. That lineage is like a big, big deal that you'll see over and over again. Um, so in South Asian culture, I think there, you definitely have a connection. There is a whole mythos of South Asian narratives from the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Puranas, and I definitely think that there's a connection there. And I would say maybe even in Arabian stuff, there's this like you care about what your lineage is, but like kind of does this lineage live through you? I think it did through my dad. Like that was a super important thing that it was big that he
Mhm.
honored his ancestors and the work that he did and the
Mhm.
way the life that he lived because if he messed up, it's kind of like he's dishonoring his own ancestors, and I think that does exist. But from my experience of studying like African culture and African heritage, when I was an Africologist, that was like the big thing. Like ancestry is like you pour libations. There's all of this like these rituals that are linked to ancestors are very very important part of life. So yeah, I would say I would say it's pretty important
Mhm.
within African culture. I don't know if I would say it's that same importance is held in other spaces though. So that's why I think when I keep her talking about when I'm doing this stuff, it's not that these ancestors are gone. They're living. They're like living within her own practice and her own existence. The work she does, the ancestors come through it. They're a vessel through her. So like it's funny, I think of like Avatar the Last Airbender, where
Mhm.
Aang is that all of the kind of ancestral avatars come through him when he taps into a spiritual state. Those ancestors kind of come through him, and I think that's what we see with the kind of work that she's talking about. That in her clay work, these ancestors are coming through her work, which I think it's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, it is.
Luckily for
Sorry,
me,
No, I
go
was
ahead.
just saying. I was just gonna say I don't know if I've ever experienced like the ancestors coming through me. I know that like we have a tradition. It's actually more Sufi tradition than like a strictly African tradition, but where like we will once a year, um we'll like just give charity in the name of the ancestors, and we'll have like this huge event and just feed people in the ancestors, in the for the ancestors. And so that might be one tradition, but like now, you know ancestors coming through me, I have not experienced that, but I would love to experience that. That's something like my grandma. I would love I had my grandma make my on my mom's side. um I had a really close relationship with her, and I'd really love for her to come through me.
I feel that. I love that. That's powerful. That's powerful. All right, let's continue, okay?
Okay.
Growing up in the cultures that I grew up in, there was a lot more openness to it. But even then, I think Islam creates a container in which people are very afraid of those communications, because there's ways in which it's accepted for ancestors to communicate. So through dreams, it's very accepted. I think a lot of cultures, people, and even in Islam, I think there's Ibn al-Arabi, which is one of the Islamic scholars, has a whole book that is about dreaming, and that the idea that you're actually in communication with the other world when you're dreaming.
Right.
But I think even within my family, there is this fear of actual ancestral communication in your awake state.
Right.
And I think a lot of people in the West also are afraid of it, because there is this fear of like, is my mental state okay?
Yeah.
Am I having a schizophrenic break? Because we've been taught that we are only living in a material world, and only things that we can observe are valid. But what I've noticed is that over time, if you become a little bit more aware, with the support of your community and people that you trust, that there is a way to communicate with the other world. It's just a matter of learning the ways in which that can happen. So what I started to notice is that when I would speak to women from East Africa, because every time I would go home, I grew up in Kenya, I have a lot of Somali family there, and after the war, we have a lot of Sudanese artists who have settled there. And so many of the women that I would come across, no matter what their background is, even if they were not artists, even if they didn't come from families where this was common, they were receiving intense visions. And I would meet them, we start having conversations, and I think that we think of these visions and ancestor communication as something special. That's what we've been taught. What I'm realizing is, in our indigenous cultures, this was something that everybody received.
Right.
And also, the way that I grew up, I always would notice that if someone was a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, whatever it was, they still had an artistic practice. There still was that love of creation. So I think we're, as humans, wired towards that kind of communication, but it's been kind of educated out of us. And I just started to notice that it can't be a coincidence when, especially a lot of the Black women that I was speaking to from different countries, from all around the world, continuously are receiving these messages that come through, and in ways that these are people who are completely grounded and healthy. It's not a schizophrenic break. And so that's when I started to realize that there is something beyond what we've been taught can be possible.
Where does your artistic practice stand in this moment? Do you feel that you actually ended up?
Yes. What do you feel?
So like recently I went to the Somali Molid, right? And she's talking about people who like experience like these spiritual states, or like experience certain presences. I don't even know how to say it. Like they're able to feel the presence of the ancestors, or just different types of, I don't know what to call it, but just entities in waking states. And at the Molid, actually one of the women like had like this moment where she was like she just have you ever seen someone catch the Holy Ghost?
Yes.
Okay, it was similar to that. Like she was just going back and forth, and she said that she felt like Fatima, the prophet's uh daughter, peace be upon him, was present with us. And I mean, she just like, what they said is she had so much muhabba, like so much love for the prophet, that like her heart couldn't handle it. Now, I've never really seen anything like this before, but I wonder if this is what she's talking about. When people are sort of in these altered states, spiritual states.
I definitely hear that. I think that's important. I think that's really interesting about these kind of the different kinds of states. And one thing for the audience, explain what a maulid is, because I'm not sure the audience knows what that is.
Oh, that is the birth. It's a celebration of the birth of the prophet, where people come together and they read qasida, they read poems to the prophet, and yeah, they just praise the prophet.
And a qasida is like a spiritual ode. It's like a song in a sense, an ode to the Prophet of Islam. Okay, cool. And there's usually lots of food too, right?
Right. Lots of food, lots of fun. Yeah.
It's like a celebration. It's a festival celebration that has different elements in it. Yes. So, yep, all of that makes sense. And I think just having these different kinds of experiences are really important. Anything else before we start going again, or?
No, I mean, I was asking about like, do you believe in those like altered spiritual states, or do you think? I mean, I don't know. That's a loaded question, but like, I don't know. For me, growing up here, it's really hard for my logical mind to understand how people go into these states. Do you know what I mean? It could, maybe I'm not spiritual enough. Maybe that's what it is. But it was hard for me to understand these things sometimes. You know?
Um, well, that's a good question. I would say it does make sense. I think people have different kinds of in Hebrew and Arabic they have two different words. You have maqam and madrega, and it means like a spiritual station that a person might be at. So people have different ways of connecting. I don't think any of these things are wrong. It's just different kinds of spiritual experiences. So I do think it's doable. I think other kinds of forces and things like that are possible, and we should be open, even if we can't really, there's things that aren't tangible that we can understand. There are abstract things, but that doesn't mean that these things are false. So I think, my father, the work he did was, you could say he was sort of like a shaman or exorcist, and he would deal with unseen forces that would plague people, and he would help people. I saw the difference. However that modality occurred, that depends on the person. But I
Yeah.
think there's different ways that we can engage and um, interpret what we're seeing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll continue.
Okay.
Becoming an artist to dig deeper into those visions, into this connection with the unseen, with your connection with your ancestor. Is that like a way of like responding to those to these needs that you decided to become an artist?
Yeah, I don't think that I had that awareness when I became an artist.
Right.
I think that I started my spiritual practice and my spiritual path before I became an artist. But I think something happens quite commonly is that when we first start a spiritual practice or a spiritual journey, and what I'm talking about much more has to do with like an animist mystical practice. I can't really speak to what the experience is of like following a more traditional Abrahamic kind of religious path. But when you're opening up yourself to like mysticism and animism, and as I said, the way that we practice our Islam is very animist and is very mystical. So it's very hard to pull those two, pull those two away. I think that you, in the first place, might be attracted to the things that we all know about, like the meditation, the awareness, the presence, the prayer, all of these things that are stillness practices. But then something happens along the way where you start to open yourself up to.
Yeah, I definitely think fusion practices are not a bad thing. It's just that it's actually kind of a norm that you will see that religious, spiritual traditions will fuse with the indigenous culture. So that makes sense.
And you realize it's almost an initiation where like a veil is dropped, and all of a sudden you realize you're like, wow, there's so much more than just me. And this is the thing about Western spirituality. It's all about the me. It's about the self. But when you open up yourself to the animism, it's about, what do I have in my path to steward? What is it that I'm meant to basically make space to help in?
Right.
So the way that I see it is that we come into this world and that we are in this physical world as basically conduits between the unseen and the seen. And that our practice, and I'll say for me personally, is to basically help bring messages that help the community that you're a part of. And that doesn't have to be a global community. For me, it's very much my family and my friends and my loved ones. And part of it is because the ancestors are on the other side, basically wanting to assist you in helping heal some of the traumas that you have in the family. So what I've noticed in my practice is that, yes, I've and making ceramics as a practice to research my own ancestry and also to bring forth stories that have been kind of put under the rug and not been allowed to have space, and also change the narrative in which people are consuming a lot of this knowledge from that part of the world. But it's also to talk about the disconnection that we have in family systems from oppressed people and oppressed lineages. And I think this is something that people don't talk about enough, is that there has been such a great trauma, and a lot of our elders didn't have the capacity to hold that. There's this intergenerational knowledge that has been broken, and a lot of families are experiencing the effect of that break. And within the family system, there is this lack of capacity to actually process what's happening. So what I've noticed when I've talked to friends who are artists from the global South and from histories that have been affected by colonization is that their art is also about healing. And I think that that's something that we don't talk about enough. One of the reasons why I've held back before from talking about this is because I had to process my own fear. Because I think, coming from traditions where there's so much shame around these topics, I had to basically overcome the fear of like the backlash, you know, and also seeing other women from my region who have been so incredibly strong and brave, and just being able to talk very honestly and being like, listen, we've had multiple different types of colonization, and like, let's talk about the fact that like the loss of our own religious practices is also a trauma. But then we want to.
That's heavy. That's a really heavy comment that was just stated right there. Being able to preserve the indigenous, even, and I think that is an issue, particularly when we see the kind of these movements that are purist movements. What they're actually interested in doing is further erasing the indigenous cultures that are there, which is problematic, I think. It's like pure for who? Who is it pure for? It's pure for the colonizer. It's not pure for the indigenous. So, yeah.
Do you think that there's a way where, I don't know, maybe the two can exist?
I think they're in conflict with each other. I think that they are in battle. The purest version initiative is like, your indigenous culture doesn't have value, so we have to erase you. Your very existence is a problem for the practice. So it would be very hard for these two to exist because they're in conflict. I would say from the kind of fusion approach, I don't think the fusion approach wants to erase. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like if we take Islam, for instance, do you think that Islam was trying to, like, do you think that Islam felt that the African indigenous practice was problematic?
It depends on what the form of Islam is that's being manifested. I think from a Salafist point of view, yes, it is. The Salafist view that believes that you have to be in the Quran and the Sunnah and have to believe in Salafi scholars, it is a problem to have any type of remnant of indigeneity. The indigeneity has to leave in order for the Islam to manifest. Now, if you take more of a variant of Sufi approach, I think that allows for more fusion aspects. But like, you look at Senegal, and most of Africa in general is pretty Sufi because of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't think that. I don't think Sufism aims to erase. I think it aims to, it's almost like elevate some of those practices,
and incorporate. If you look at Shirdi Sai Baba, who's considered as a divine being in South Asia, he did that. He fused the indigenous South Asian culture with the Islamic culture. And those kind of fused Islamic/Hindu practices worked very well together,
Yeah, I think that
they harmonized. But this more Salafi kind of variant of Islam is in conflict. It does not, it says only one of us can exist here,
Well, that's strange. Yeah, but I don't think that's the way the prophet.
So, there's an issue. We have to be very careful about saying that, because it depends on whose perspective of the prophet. If you're taking a Salafi perspective of the prophet, it is completely aligned.
I mean like a Sufi perspective.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. That's why we have to be very clear with our language.
Yeah.
If you're taking a Salafi perspective, He went into the Kaaba and destroyed all the idols. He's saying your indigenous Arabic culture cannot coexist with the Islamic culture. You know, do you get what I'm saying? So in their eye, it is completely consistent. In the view of the Sufi, it's more complex and more murky and there's more nuance. But yes, I think for the Salafis' perspective of and that's the question: who is the Prophet of Islam? And it's going to vary depending on how you view Islam. This very central figure is going to change drastically. They are not the same person. The Sufi manifestation of this person is not the same as the Salafi manifestation. They're very different people. So I think that's an important distinction. So let's continue.
Continue it, whether it's Christianity or Islam in Africa, that we, in Islam they talk so much about like the age of the Jahila, which is the age of ignorance, saying that anything before Islam was ignorance. And I'm like, there is a way to practice the mystical heart of Islam with the animist ways that we practiced, and understand that, I had this conversation with my father, and we were talking about the fact that a land like Sudan, for instance, where he's from, is a place that has had and held so many different types of people, so many different types of culture. And we continue to evolve, we continue to change. And that's part of the superpower, is not to be stuck in one idea, but that shame, this like fear of getting in trouble, I think holds a lot of people back. And part of my body of work that I'm exploring this year is talking about being an artist, being a woman, coming from a Muslim background, and having shame be something that holds you back. That's a huge thing.
It's so interesting because so many of like how animist practices, because you were talking about animism, right? Like the belief that spiritual forces and ancestors exist also in non-animated objects, also in nature.
It sounds like she has a French accent. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez acheter?
Yeah, I think she does.
All of those practices are very much like embedded within like Islam or Christianity, but also in some ways they are being practiced so secretly.
Yes.
And yet they still continued, right? Yeah. So there's like a big duality here, and like what has been your process and those arts and creating those like incredible like portal and vessel has been helping you going through this duality.
No, absolutely. I think the liberation that comes from being an artist for me has also been just having the freedom to not be at a 9-to-5, for instance. Like that was a big thing. Like I had a background in development, and I worked at a big foundation in New York for 7 years before I ever became an artist. I never went to art school. Like art was something that I discovered in my late 20s. Like, of course, I was always artistic since I was a child, but because of the conditioning of the family structure that I lived in, I never thought that it would be possible for me to ever be an artist. It was never a vocation or even a career that was in my environment. And I remember being at this job and just telling myself what I want of my life is I want to never have to work with people who I don't get along with and who I don't like. And that was something, and like, bless the people that I worked with, they were wonderful, but they were not my people. And I was like, I either leave now or the money's going to be too good and I'm not going to be able to ever escape. Yeah. And I think part of that spiritual practice too is to be able to listen in that moment. Something told me, like all my friends, my friend, I caught up with a friend. And she told me, she was like, what you did was absolutely insane. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, do you remember you took 3 months of a ceramic course and decided you were quitting your job and this was going to be your life? And I told her, I'm like, something guided me within me. I wouldn't have felt it. And I felt it. And that's the thing also about mystical teachings is people are like, tell me how I get there. It's not about following my formula. The mystical teaching is about following your internal guidance, because something that works for someone else doesn't work for you. Right. So this whole thing of trying to listen to people who've made it or whatever it is as a way to replicate their path, the mystical path is when you're at that fork in the road, do you know what you're being told to do? Yeah. And then
that's like really powerful that she's saying I chose my vocation, my vision, as opposed to money. I think that's a pretty powerful thing, and I think that's a hard thing for many people.
You always have to take the risk when you're being told to go a certain way, and that's the big practice, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, it is. Is there like an ancestors that you listen to, that you are close to, that's like particularly present?
Absolutely. It's very interesting. I feel like, there are ancestors who I knew and some who I didn't. So I'll take my grandmothers as an example. I never met my mother's mother. She died when my mom was very young. And then my father's mother I grew up with, and she was such a she carried so much of that Nubian, Sufi, matriarchal energy. So I feel like a lot of who I am is shaped by watching how she moved. And she had incredible integrity and, had 13 children. And so we have like 43 cousins, and she was just so amazing. But I feel her guidance very much. But then what's also very interesting is that my mother's mother started to come to me in dreams. And my mother comes from a lineage of dreamers. And although I don't think she necessarily fully awoke to that in her lifetime, when we were growing up, she always had incredible premonitions. Like she would see people right before they passed. If my mother told us not to do something as children, we knew that there was power in that.
Right.
But I told my parents, I remember a few years ago, I was like, mom's mom started coming to me.
So you were able to have those conversations with your parents.
Yeah. And I think because there is that understanding of communication, from the other world that's there, they were able to take it in. And I was telling them, like, I saw her in a dream, but then also I would feel her. And sometimes I would feel her in really random things. I started to want to learn how to cook Somali food. And I'd be in the kitchen, and then all of a sudden I would feel her, almost in my body guiding me as to what to do. Also, when I'd be having hard times in my life, I would see her and feel her. I'd be in bed. She would come and I could feel her just just put your head on my lap. Let me just take care of you, or tell me you need to stop doing this. This is the last day that you're engaging in this destructive behavior.
Yeah.
If you want to continue in this path and you want the blessing, you have to get rid of this.
Yeah.
And then what you have to do is all right, this thing's out, and it's that fortitude to when a challenge is put in front of you, that you jump and you trust.
Yeah. You talk about the more than human world. Is there where you believe our ancestors are, and you have learned to constantly communicate with them and having them guiding you like your mother?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm still so young in many ways, I'm close to 40, but still so young in terms of there's so much that I don't understand.
Amazing. She doesn't look like a day past 30.
And I'm lucky to have a few elders and a few aunts that I'm able to lean on. But I'm still trying to understand what the classification of what these dimensions look like and what they are. I think a lot of people are on that path of trying to figure that out. So I know that there's, for me, and when I say I know, it's within my own knowing. I know that there is a world in which those who have been embodied exist. And then there's a world in which those who are never human and who are other exist. The sheikh is basically someone who's a scholar of Islam. And usually the sheikhs in Sudan and in Somalia are a lot of times seers. And they're people who, there's such a spectrum. You'll have people that you go to who are very by the book and very orthodox. And then you have people that you go to who literally are intermediaries between worlds, and they will come to your property, and then they'll be able to see the jinns that are there, and they'll tell you these are the prayers we need to do, and these are the offerings we need to make. And so I really do believe that there is this world of the unseen. And then, when you go into mythology of ancient.
Yeah, I agree, Ren. It is difficult. And it's hard because the system that we're in doesn't create things equally. And I think about the university space that pushes certain kind of careers, which is kind of this really I think the university, having several degrees and having gone through the university process multiple times, it does not honor all jobs are not created equally, but you pay the same amount of money to get those degrees, which I think it's kind of evil in a sense, that people are willing to say, I'll take all your money and give you a degree that will never give you any income making capacity. That's just pretty vile, but we allow it. And we don't treat all jobs as equal, and I think that there's some problematic elements to that. I think that this journey is pretty powerful about what she's sharing. And she said, I'm following my own personal dream, my own personal vision, and connecting it to my spiritual heritage and culture. That's pretty powerful.
Egypt and Nubia that we were talking about earlier, is that some people even believe that these gods were just different beings that existed in another world.
Right.
And the gift of the ancient Egyptian and Nubian civilization, like a lot of great civilizations, those in South America, those in Asia, all over the world, is that they were able to basically see a certain dimension in which these beings existed, and they were able to basically replicate it through the art, through the architecture, through the adornment, through the objects. They were basically bringing that which existed in a divine realm into this one, and which I really believe is why so many people connect to ancient Egypt, is because it's speaking to something that exists in another dimension.
And this is how you're seeing your artistic practice also?
In what way?
The sculpture that you are making, is it for you something that's also coming from the unseen world?
I think like all creative acts, because we're taking something that's disembodied and making it, come into this world. Even if it's music is still something that's coming into this world that we're able to experience. So I think all creative acts is taking and that's the channel. It's like we're radio signals, and we're finding a certain dimension, and we're bringing something down from that. Even like aesthetic expressions, when someone has an aesthetic expression that's just so dialed, I'm like, oh, you tapped into another world, and you're able to be a conduit for that world. And I remember one of the messages that I received, probably in a meditation or something, it told me, if you create something that comes from that unseen world, it'll always be received because it exists within every person. And so that's the thing, is when you get out, it's the universality of it. That's why certain art, when you walk through a gallery or an exhibition, it really hits you, because you see that person transmitted something beyond.
And it's way beyond like any cultures, any time, any religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you see yourself in this world? How would you describe you being?
In this
who
world.
are you?
Yeah.
And who are we?
I think for myself, I really feel like I belong to kind of multiple communities of people, and that's like how I see myself. Even in the work that I do, it only is possible because of the people that I'm able to be around. Even when I think of like my artistic practice or anything that I've been able to do, it's because I'm in this network with a lot of people and a lot of artists who kind of think in this particular way. So I sometimes try to get out of the like, who am I thing, because it's so defined by who I collectively am with other people. And I think it also like helps stay out of this like special thinking, which I think can be very destructive to an artist, to think that like your transmission is the only transmission that has value.
Very special and very different from everybody else.
And I think that specialness is remedied with collective communal experiences and understanding, and that this shadow work, or these difficult things that we have to kind of work through as humans, as artists, is that it requires community. Like visionary experiences don't happen individually. I want to become someone who, in a community that can hold the next generation of people, but also because my friend talked about us being like spiritual orphans, because we are the people trying to like define what it is that we are, that I almost see it as like parts of the puzzle are coming through multiple people in a collective, and that it's not one person that is going to receive the full message. And this is part, I think, of like kind of decolonizing the idea of like, even like these ideas that we're given of like this one man that's coming to solve the whole thing. It's like, no, it comes through multiple people in collective experiences, building new rituals together. And I think that's the other part of it, is like I center so much of my practice around ritual, because I really believe that the disconnection of our ancient rituals is why a lot of us are so sick right now. Those rituals are the remedy to a lot of that pain.
Is there like a ritual in particular that you feel is
Mm-hmm.
really incredible and should be back into all our lives?
I think it's hard for me to say particular ritual, but I think that rituals too. Okay, what I will say is grief is a really important one. I was listening to someone who was talking about that trauma does not happen because of the event. Trauma happens because of the lack of alchemizing that event and actually being able to process it. So I think grief, and I've seen people in my own family really be shattered by grief. I think that process on your own, and I think it's and sometimes to build new rituals, because the reality is we're in a diverse, culturally mixed environment. We don't have one ritual, so we can live on. For instance,
Sorry about that. Let me get back. That was just a small difficulty.
collective, and that it's not one person that is going to receive the full message. And it's hard to think of like kind of decolonizing the idea of like, even like these ideas that we are we're given of like this one man that's coming to solve the whole thing. It's like, no, it comes through multiple people in collective experiences, building new rituals together. And I think that's the other part of it is like, I center so much of my practice around ritual because I really believe that the disconnection of our ancient rituals is why a lot of us are so sick right now. Those rituals are the remedy to a lot of that pain.
Is there like a ritual in particular that you feel is
Mm-hmm.
really incredible and should be back into all our lives?
I think it's hard for me to say a particular ritual, but I think that rituals
I
too.
totally agree.
What I will say
And I think
is
it's
grief is a really
for
important
sharing
one.
that.
I was listening to someone who was talking about that trauma does not happen because of the event. Trauma happens because of the lack of alchemizing that event and actually being able to process it. So I think grief, and I've seen people in my own family really be shattered by grief. And I think that that's one of those emotions that you can't process on your own. And I think it's incredibly important to have rituals around this. And a lot of the time we have to build new rituals because the reality is we're in a diverse, culturally mixed environment.
Right.
We don't have one cultural, lineage that we can lean on. So for instance, I had a dear friend whose father passed and we came together in a ritual. We like represented every continent there, And what was so beautiful is that we were able to build new rituals of acknowledging our own loved ones who passed, putting in seeding prayers for the things and the people that we want to improve relationships with. And then also just holding someone in that pain that they're moving through. And so I really believe in, yes, we have to be rooted in what was, but we also have to look forward towards the future. Something my father would always teach me is that culture is by definition moving all the time. What we think is traditional might have only come into our families or our culture 100 years ago.
Right.
And, it's this idea of like, a friend also would say this is tend to the fire, but don't worship the ashes. So have that respect for what was. But when it's dying, don't hold on to what is dying.
Create your own.
And be in that place of being able to evolve. But also that comes with collective regulation. You have to make sure that you're moving along with all of the variables in your ecosystem being tended for.
Right.
It's not
a collective.
It's a collective. It's not I'm deciding we're moving on in this way. And it's a hierarchy. No, it's this aspect of listening to like what it is that needs to happen and unfold.
Yeah. What is creation to you?
Yeah, what is creation to me? For me, creation is having a feeling and wanting to alchemize it into something. And I think a lot of people will say, well, I'm not an artist. And it's like, well, did you curate a beautiful table for a loved one during a gathering? Like that's an act of creation, Even in the way people adorn themselves, you came into a beautiful space and you dressed in a way that feels authentic to you. This is the big thing, is it's not about fashion. It's about what allows you to embody the archetype in which you want to carry that evening. And that for me is an act of creation. And so life every day is being in creation. And that's why I'm like, my art is the everyday. Even sometimes I can't be in the studio for a whole month because I need a break. And you know what? I am in creation all the time. And for me, the way that I see it is there's a feeling. I remember when I never was a dancer, but when I was in college, I would take classes at an African dance studio. And I remember it was an experience those years that taught me how to take a feeling and then translate that into something. And so I feel like that was a foundation that helped me in my practice. It's like, oh, now I know what it feels like to have something and then to want to make it embodied.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dina. That was incredible. Thank you for sharing all those very personal and deep view of the world and of your spiritual practice. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that was pretty powerful. Thank you for making it all the way through. I think it's a really powerful piece where you can learn and grow and think and have deep ideas on this. So thank you for going on this journey together. And we will see you in the next one. All right. Bye bye.